Well, meeting you almost after a month, I had gone up north for some seminars and on Auroville. So it was a bit longish trip. Well, coming back to our study, I think we have to start on Canto 4, Book 1. Canto 4, if you see, the title is called The Secret Knowledge. And regarding this title, Sri Aurobindo has something to tell us. See, in his letters on Savitri, letter of 1946, I had read this earlier, but I would like to reread that in this context. You see, Canto 3 is titled The Yoga of the King, the Yoga of the Soul's Release. Canto 4 is the Secret Knowledge. Then in Canto 5, the title repeats itself, The Yoga of the King, the Yoga of the Spirit's Freedom and Greatness. So, somebody asks him, why don't you repeat, or why didn't you repeat the same, the Yoga of the King in Canto 4 also? Because they are all sequential cantos. So, to that I think Sri Aurobindo is answering. As to the title of the 3 cantos about the Yoga of the King, I intended the repetition of the word Yoga to bring out and emphasize the fact that this part of Ashwapati's spiritual development consisted of 2 yogic movements. One, a psycho-spiritual transformation, and the other, a greater spiritual transformation, with an ascent to a supreme power. The omission which you suggest, that means the omission, the Yoga of the King, should not be omitted. Sri Aurobindo says, the omission which you suggest would destroy this significance and leave only something more abstract. In the second of these 3 cantos, there is a pause between the 2 movements and the description of the secret knowledge to which he is led and of which the results are described in the last canto. But there is no description of the yoga itself or of the steps by which this knowledge came. So now it makes it clear that there is the process of yoga which is being described in Canto 3 and Canto 5. Canto 4, there is no process. He is only giving us a description of the results, as he puts it here. In the second of these 3 cantos, there is a pause between the 2 movements and a description of the secret knowledge. So Sri Aurobindo is clarifying that as there is only a description and not the process, he says, I did not use the phrase the yoga of the King. And then again there is a second part of this letter. It says that is only indicated, not narrated. That is the yoga is indicated, not narrated. So to bring the Yoga of the King as the title of this canto would not be very apposite. Ashwapati's yoga falls into 3 parts. Now this is the second part. First, he is achieving his own spiritual self-fulfillment as the individual, and this is described as the Yoga of the King. Next, he makes the ascent as a typical representative of the race to win the possibility of discovery and possession of all the planes of consciousness, and this is described in the second book. But this too is as yet only an individual victory. Finally, he aspires no longer for himself but for all, for a universal realization and new creation. That is described in the book of the Divine Mother. I think we have read this and discussed it before, but this gives us a kind of a very broad outline of the Yoga of the King, or what we are talking about, the integral yoga. So this Canto 3, 4 and 5 is now clear. 3 gives us the Yoga of the King, the process where there is the release of the psychic or the soul, as he calls it, from ignorance. The second one gives only a description of the secret knowledge. Third one, again, he gives the process by which he goes forward. And then the 3 parts is what I would like you to understand. First is achieving his own spiritual self-fulfillment as the individual. So this entire book 1 is nothing but Sri Aurobindo or Ashwapati's own spiritual self-fulfillment as the individual. And therefore we see as an individual, what did Ashwapati do in order to be liberated? So this is exactly, I see a phase in Sri Aurobindo's own yoga, which was prior to coming to Pondicherry, before 1910. So we know right from the beginning all the achievements that he has had, spiritual achievements, are part of this individual spiritual self-fulfillment as the individual. Because if you remember, I have repeated it quite many times before, that he has had all the experiences that spirituality seeks for. That means the inner divine, the immanent divine, as we say. He had this experience when he was in Baroda. Then he had this experience of the universal divine, that is in Alipur jail. Then he had the experience of the divinity in matter, when he had the darshan of Kali on the Narmada river. He saw the great Kali in a small statue. Then when he goes to Shankara hill, he has the experience of the immanent, this divinity as Sri Shankara himself has experienced. That means the impersonal divinity. So what all spirituality speaks of, the inner divine, the outer divine, the transcendent divine, all this he has already achieved. So that is what is the individual self-fulfillment, which is seen in book 1 of Savitri. Now, second book, he says, the second aspect is a typical representative of the race to win the possibility of discovery and possession of all the planes of consciousness. This is book 2. So all the planes of consciousness, that's why it's a very long book in almost 10,000 lines, giving us the description of the world stair. That means he's going, ascending from level to level and discovering the new planes of consciousness. And this phase is typically once Sri Aurobindo comes to Pondicherry. That's from 1910, it goes almost up to 1935. And this was the period when Sri Aurobindo was discovering the different planes of consciousness right up to the level of the supramental. And a lot of his books, letters, all this point out to this discovery. So that's book 2 and Sri Aurobindo's life almost from 1910 to 35. Then there's a finally, he says, finally he aspires no longer for himself but for all, for a universal realization and new creation. Here in this Savitri is book 3, what is known as the book of the Divine Mother. In Sri Aurobindo's own life, it is from 1930s till the end of his life. So where we see a very beautiful transition to a universal realization and new creation. So I have thought about that, and then I see these three phases of Ashwapati's yoga are exactly the three phases of Sri Aurobindo's own life. And what's wonderful to see is Sri Aurobindo took up the writing of Savitri in the third phase of his yoga, not in the second phase of his yoga, right from 1914 to 1935, when he was writing the Arya. So there is a distinct difference between the Arya writing and the writings of Savitri. So you can see in the Life Divine, in all the other books, a beautiful logical clarity of thought, because he was discovering the different levels of thought, levels of mind beyond the mind. So, whereas in Savitri, the level of consciousness is no more this planes of consciousness, but really on the universalization. And this is an aspect which Sri Aurobindo emphasizes, is there typically on the level of the supermind, on the overmind. And because I've been thinking that why did Sri Aurobindo resume Savitri at that late age in the 1930s, whereas he had completed all his writings by then. But then I could understand that this was a reflection of his universalization or universal consciousness. And then this universality, or as Sri Aurobindo calls it as the cosmic consciousness, is now expressed in Savitri, totally. And that's where I found the secret of why is it that all of us, those who have taken to Savitri, we may not understand much, we do not understand much, and yet it appeals to us. It appeals to some part of our being. That's because, you see, many persons come to read the Life Divine, they say it's very difficult, we don't understand the concept, the sentences are too long, etc., etc. But nobody complains the similar thing about Savitri. They may not understand, sentences are long, everything. And yet, because of this cosmic consciousness, which can identify itself with the individual, that each one of us gets captured by that. And there is a line I found which is extremely interesting, that's on page 923 by my edition, 1954 edition. He says the essential character of this overmental consciousness or the cosmic consciousness is perhaps that there is something behind of which I have already spoken, and which comes not primarily from the mind or the vital emotion or the physical seeing, but from the cosmic self and its consciousness standing behind them all and things, and then tend to be seen not as the mind or heart or body sees them, but as this greater consciousness feels or sees or answers to them. In the direct overmind transmission, this something behind is usually forced to the front or close to the front by a combination of words which carries the suggestion of a deeper meaning, or by the force of an image, or most of all by an intonation and a rhythm which carry up the depths in their wide wash or long march or mounting surge. Now this is the secret of why, even without our understanding, we are carried, as he puts it beautifully, by the depths in their wide wash or long march or mounting surge of what? Of a force of an image, of a deeper suggestion of a meaning. So each one of us, we respond to Savitri to the extent we are open to it, and each one of us is carried by that surge of imagery, by that rhythm, by that, that shabda, as we say. And then down the line, or down the same letter, which he has written, a very long one actually, he explains that the overmind thinks in a mass, its thought, feeling, vision is high or deep or wide, or all these things together. And I think I remember in one of my first introductory classes I had mentioned that how in Savitri the two elements that stand out significantly is Sri Aurobindo's stress on truth and on the rasa of Ananda. He said this is the typical characteristic of overmind aesthetics. It emphasizes upon truth and it has the body of Ananda as expression, a body of delight, body of beauty, body of love. So this Ananda is expressed through beauty and love and form. So if this is what we can remember, then we understand what is the secret of Savitri, why does it appeal to us. You see, each time whenever we read Savitri, we say, wow, it's right. I think I understand, this is actually right, it's a fact. This is what man is like, this is what is the inner truth. And then there's always, all this is couched in a beautiful love, beauty and delight. So this, I've referred to this because I found that this is the phase in which Sri Aurobindo himself was living when he was writing Savitri. The third phase of his life, which was the one of the universal and the cosmic consciousness. So we now understand the three phases of Ashwapati's yoga: the individual, transcending his ego or ignorance. Then the second one is the secret knowledge, where he has the transcendence of the different levels of planes. Third one is where he becomes the universal consciousness. Having said that, to come back to these three cantos, I have already read out why Sri Aurobindo does not bring in the same title the yoga of knowledge, the secret knowledge, but he calls it straight away the secret knowledge. Now to take it up, I find, why is it that we keep telling that all this is nothing but Sri Aurobindo's own yoga, although it is given in the name of Ashwapati? Because there's such a great similarity between Ashwapati's yoga and Sri Aurobindo's yoga, and we say it cannot be anything else but Sri Aurobindo's own yoga. Now, if you have noted Sri Aurobindo's yoga and Sri Aurobindo's life, I could perhaps put it in this manner. The Sri Aurobindo's yoga has been basically one of what we say neti. Means not this, not this. Whereas the mother's yoga, or Savitri's yoga, is one of iti and iti. I mean, this is it. This is the path. This is the right thing. So there is in Sri Aurobindo's yoga and Ashwapati's yoga the similarity of rejection, of not accepting this boundary. Say, no, it's not that. I mean, start with Sri Aurobindo's experience of Apollo Bandar when he comes from England. He has a fantastic silence of the mind, but he says, neti, this is not it. There's something beyond that. When he has in Baroda the inner divinity, again neti. So everywhere there's a denial. He doesn't stop at any spiritual experience. He says there is a beyond. This is not the end of spiritual road. So it is a kind of a denial, a kind of a rejection, a kind of a surpassing. And we see this in Ashwapati too. He first of all denies his physical existence. He says something, there's something beyond the body. There's book 1, canto 3. He goes beyond the physical senses. Then he goes into the levels of consciousness, the world states. He doesn't stop at the mental or the vital or the mental. He keeps going up. Each world he says, no, this is not the end. This is not the end. Exactly like Sri Aurobindo, he also keeps moving forward. And ultimately we see that there is stage of nirvana. He doesn't accept because this is Sri Aurobindo's own experience. When he was in Baroda, he had this nirvanic experience. He says, no, nirvana is not the end. And Ashwapati also does the same thing. And then when Ashwapati goes to the Supreme Mother, initially she advises him to wait. She says the earth is not ready for my descent. But Ashwapati does not accept even Supreme Mother's advice. He says, no, humanity is suffering. We cannot wait further. So it is only when the Supreme Mother agrees to descend upon earth, or what we call this, when she grants the boon, that Ashwapati stops there and he says, yes. That is the stage when he accepts. So we have in Sri Aurobindo also the similar growth. All his experiences he denies until he reaches the supramental. He does not go by the immanent divine or whatever the impersonal divinity, nothing. So we can say that this yoga of Ashwapati or Sri Aurobindo is one of neti, one of denial, rejection, purification. And that's what we see later as one of the scholars, I do not remember his name, he pointed out very well, saying, in all this Sri Aurobindo's yoga that we see in Book 1, Canto 3, 4, 5 and Book 2 and Book 3, the word surrender is not much used. It comes only 3 or 4 times. And I thought it was a very good discovery. I was not aware of that. Because this is basically Sri Aurobindo's yoga, as we have seen, aspiration, rejection, surrender. So it was the yoga of rejection. Of course, in the beginning there is aspiration, but emphatically it is Sri Aurobindo's yoga of rejection. Rejection is purification, neti. Then ultimately there is surrender. Whereas the mother's is the different, is the yoga of iti. She begins with the surrender. Surrender to the inner being, to the psychic level and all that. So these are the 2 aspects that come out prominently in their yoga. And so we see here there is a description of the secret knowledge. Now what exactly is the secret knowledge? I mean a secret knowledge which Ashwapati gains after his liberation, as we have in the previous canto, a line which says, thus came his soul's release from ignorance, his mind and body's first spiritual change. So the first result of his yoga was soul's release from ignorance, from his own ego, from his own body self. And then of course we have the last lines which are very beautiful and suggestive, where he says, immeasurable by the common look, he made great dreams a mold for coming things, and cast his deeds like bronze to front the years. His walk through time outstripped the human stride, lonely his days and splendid like the suns. So this was the first phase. You can see already he is on great height. And as if in continuation, the line that comes here, the secret knowledge is, on a height he stood that looked towards greater heights. So what we have seen in Sri Aurobindo in the last couple of cantos, that he starts somewhere and then there's a kind of a flashback. There's a kind of a going back and explaining what has happened or what is he doing. So the opening line, like we had the other canto also, the opening lines are majestic. They open as if the curtain on a new thing. And then we go back and Sri Aurobindo explains. You see here in canto 3, a world's desire compelled her mortal birth. It's a beautiful curtain raiser. The world's desire compelled her mortal birth. And after that, we go back into his own release, into his own yoga. So similarly, we have a line here, on a height he stood, that looked towards greater heights. Our early approaches to the infinite are sunrise splendors on a marvelous verge, while lingers yet unseen the glorious sun. It's a very dramatic opening. You can almost visualize Ashwapati standing there and looking towards greater heights. So what is that greater height? Is it the supermind? Is it the overmind? It's too early to say. But at least we know that he has come to such a phase in his life where he has gotten rid of his own individual ego, his ignorance, and after that begins the real journey. In Sri Aurobindo's own life, the real journey was the journey across the planes of consciousness, the different planes of consciousness. But here we will see what is Ashwapati receiving as the secret knowledge. I am using the word receiving because here as Sri Aurobindo himself says, he is not giving us the process of achieving the secret knowledge. He is only giving us a description of the secret knowledge. And when I was reading this canto, of course, those of you who are familiar with the Gita, you would know that the Gita itself speaks of the secret knowledge or the secret, and I refer to the essays on the Gita, and that's in this volume 13 on page 538. Sri Aurobindo has given us in brief the secret knowledge as seen in the Gita. And very interestingly, this canto reflects a lot what is described in the Gita. It goes beyond, but there is a description of the secret knowledge as seen in the Gita. So before I take up in detail the canto, I would like to give you a little brief background of these three of the secret knowledge in the Gita. The secret thing, Guhyam, that all deep spiritual knowledge reveals to us, mirrored in various teachings and justified in the soul's experience, is for the Gita the secret of the spiritual self hidden within us, of which mind and external nature are only manifestations or figures. So this is what we are going to see here also, that is the secret of the spiritual self hidden within us. That means the immanent divinity, you call it the soul, the psychic being, the Atman, whatever. So that's what the Gita gives long description about this secret self, the Guhyam, the secret knowledge. And then it is the secret of the constant relations between soul and nature, Purusha and Prakriti. But here also in this canto, after the mid-stage, there are extraordinary descriptions of the relations of the Purusha and Prakriti. We'll come to that. So that is the first secret knowledge, the inner being hidden within us, and it's the relation between Purusha and Prakriti, the secret of an indwelling Godhead who is the Lord of all existence and veiled from us in its forms and movements. The second one. Now Gita goes to say the more secret thing, Guhyataram, developed by the Gita is the profound reconciling truth of the divine Purushottama, at once self and Purusha, supreme Brahman and a soul, intimate, mysterious, ineffable Godhead. This deeper mystery is founded on the secret of the supreme spiritual Prakriti and of the Jiva, an eternal portion of the divine in that eternal and this manifested nature, and of one spirit and essence with him in his immutable self-existence. Well, that is taking us higher, and here we do not get in this canto about this second Guyataram, the more secret thing. You see, in this canto we are being told only about the secret knowledge of the psychic being or the soul. Then in canto 5, you will see what Gita describes as the greatest secret, which is about the Lord, the Purushottama, the Supreme Brahman, the Purusha. And then we jump to the third paragraph in this on page 539. Sri Aurobindo is telling us, and now there comes the supreme word and most secret thing of all, Guyatamam, that the Spirit and Godhead is an infinite free from all dharmas, and though He conducts the world according to fixed laws and leads man through his dharmas of ignorance and knowledge, sin and virtue, right and wrong, liking and disliking and indifference, pleasure and pain, joy and sorrow, and the rejection of these opposites, through his physical and vital, intellectual, emotional, ethical and spiritual forms and rules and standards, yet the Spirit and the Godhead transcends all these things, and if we too can cast away all dependence on dharmas, surrender ourselves to this free and eternal Spirit, and taking care only to keep ourselves absolutely and exclusively open to Him, trust to the light and power and delight of the Divine in us, and unafraid and ungrieving, accept only His guidance, then that is the truest, the greatest release, and that brings the absolute and inevitable perfection of our self and nature. This is the way offered to the chosen Spirit, to those only in whom He takes the greatest delight, because they are nearest to Him and most capable of oneness and of being even as He, freely consenting and concordant with nature in her highest power and movement, universal in soul consciousness, transcendent in the Spirit. Well, this is, of course, is given in the Gita, where the Lord at the end says, Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam braja. So abandoning all dharmas, take shelter in me alone. So, but it's interesting to see that how the Gita, you see, this verse comes almost in chapter 18, towards the end of the Gita. And where does it end? Sarva dharman parityaja. It says, abandon all, sacrifice all dharmas. Because just as the Lord is beyond all dharmas, so too you abandon all these mental, intellectual, ethical dharmas and take shelter in Him alone. So that is the absolute surrender. And now we see in Sri Aurobindo also, aspiration, rejection and surrender. Surrender comes the end, that's the ultimate thing. And surrender to Him alone, not to the ego, not to the fancies, not to the vital, not to the mental. So I am seeing a tremendous similarity between the Gita and Sri Aurobindo's own yoga. Both of them speak of the surrender as the ultimate. And here, amongst the three secrets that we have seen, in this canto, the secret knowledge, we are going to get mostly the description of the first secret, the Guyam, that is about the spiritual self hidden within us and the relation of Purusha and Prakriti. So this is in brief, but now this is what we are going to get in the poetic form as the experience of Sri Aurobindo or Ashokapati. So I would like you to keep this in mind. The first secret is the spiritual self within. The second secret is about the divinity, the transcendent. The third secret is that it is only in surrender to this transcendent and the inner divine that you can have a perfection in your life. So this being the essence of the Gita, we see the same secret knowledge being achieved by Ashokapati or Sri Aurobindo himself. So now let me take up the reading of this canto 4. So what is the description that we get here? As I read the first 4 lines, on a height he stood that looked towards greater heights. You see, there is a kind of, open-endedness when he says that look towards greater heights. It's not the next height, it's not the end. Because peak after peak, even in the Vedas we have the description. In spirituality there is this endless adventure. We cannot say this is the end. You go and stand on the higher peak, and from there you see the next higher peak. So peak after peak you climb. There's no end. It's a kind of an endless journey. So Ashwapati now stands on a peak, on a height from where he looks towards greater heights. Our early approaches to the infinite are sunrise splendors on a marvelous verge, where lingers yet unseen the glorious sun. You see, whatever our approaches are, the early approaches, are really, compared to the future that is yet to come, the glorious sun that is yet to come. These are indications, signals of the future of the rising sun. Especially if you go, I don't know if you can do that. We in Pondicherry, when we go for a morning walk or exercises, we see the sunrise. Now when we see the sunrise, before the sunrise, we have this approaches as what Shobna calls. There's a sunlight coming in, sometimes the clouds are, there's a beautiful background of light coming in. We don't see the sun yet, but we can already foresee the coming of the sun. So he says, our early approaches to the infinite, all our approaches through religion, through spirituality, through any kind of thing, these are nothing compared to the sun, the glorious sun that is going to come. So all this life, in fact, somewhere I was reading, Sri Aurobindo tells us that all that mankind has done till now is only a preparation for the supramental coming, for the coming of the supermind. So imagine the thousands of years of all our cultures, religion, religious achievements, everything that mankind has done is only a preparation for what is yet to come. So that is the fantastic glory that awaits mankind. So he says, what now we see is a shadow of what must come. A beautiful, simple sentence. It's a shadow, he calls it. There's nothing glorious about it. We may really have all the praises for man's culture and achievement, but this is only a shadow of what must come. The earth's uplook to a remote unknown is a preface only of the epic climb of human soul from its flat earthly state to the discovery of a greater self and the far gleam of an eternal light. Well, these are very clear lines, you can understand. The earth's uplook to a remote unknown is a preface only of the epic climb. So the same idea that all that we have done, we are doing is only a preface, is only a shadow. The real is yet to come. And the far gleam of an eternal light. Now there's a sudden shift of scene, and if you see beautiful lines. This world is a beginning and a base where life and mind erect their structured dreams. An unborn power must build reality. This world is a beginning and a base where life and mind erect their structured dreams. You see, till now the evolution has come to the level of life and mind, where we have erected our beautiful dreams, achieved many dreams, but then an unborn power must build reality. Behind all this, there is the unseen, unborn power. And what is this unborn power is what the mystery, which we'll come across a little later. Is it a supermind? Is it a divinity which is building this reality? What is that unborn power? But then he goes on to say, now these are oft-quoted lines. A death-bound littleness is not all we are. Immortal, our forgotten vastnesses await discovery in our summit selves. Unmeasured breadths and depths of being are ours. You see, obviously, any spiritual person would know that a death-bound littleness is not all we are. I mean, of course, if your consciousness is on the physical, material level, then we say our being is nothing but only a littleness. But Sri Auroville is telling us, those of us who realize the psychic being or the inner being will understand that this body, this vital is not all that we are. There's something more, something greater. Immortal, our forgotten vastnesses await discovery. You see, now what is this forgotten vastnesses? The breadths and depths of being are ours. You see, within us there is a different world. Beyond us there is a different world. There are different levels and planes of being. And then beyond that we have this Vijnanamaya, Anandamaya and Chaitanyamaya. The worlds after worlds. Chidghana Loka he calls it, Ananda Ghana Loka. So these are the breadths and the vastnesses of worlds which are beyond us and yet within our reach. They are not really alien to us. So, immortal, our forgotten vastnesses, we have forgotten because we do not have the contact. But yet they await our discovery. Akin to the ineffable secrecy, mystic, eternal in unrealized time, neighbors of heaven are nature's altitudes. To these high-peaked dominions, sealed to our search, too far from surface nature's postal routes, too lofty for our mortal lives to breathe, deep in us, a forgotten kinship points, and a faint voice of ecstasy and prayer calls to those lucent, lost immensities. These are, you can see, I mean, this is what I was telling you in the beginning. You see, these lines come so close to you. And here we say, yes, I recognize this. This is the truth of my being. There's a kind of a, nodding of a recognition. So look at these lines. He says, to these high-peaked dominions sealed to our search, all these are the high-peaked dominions, what we call here, the unmeasured breadths and depths of being, are sealed to our search, too far from our surface nature's postal routes. You see the beautiful use of the word postal. In those times we did not have this post office like this, but there's a person running around the village, running around the place, and he has a specific route to deliver the letters. So that is the postal, means that route which you follow every day. And he is comparing that to our own life. Ours is also kind of a postal route. Every day we get up, do the same thing, repeat the same thing, have the same material consciousness. So, too far from surface nature's postal routes, too lofty for our mortal lives to breathe. Too lofty because our common consciousness, we breathe the common things that are very close to earth. We never breathe of things that are far, spiritual, something really high consciousness. So we have a very small bit of common mortal breath. Deep in us, a forgotten kinship points and a faint voice of ecstasy and prayer calls. You see, we have forgotten those heights. We are not really, that's too lofty. But we connect. We try to connect with these lofty, high-peaked dominions by what? By voice of ecstasy and prayer. So this is something important, the utility of prayer. A prayer which connects you to that invisible, which connects you to that too far, the high-peaked dominions. But there's one beautiful thing, he calls it voice of ecstasy and prayer. Because prayer we all understand, where you are quiet, go within, we have some kind of a personal image and we say, oh Lord, oh deity, oh Mother. There's a personal contact. But why is this voice of ecstasy? It says in this, and a faint voice of ecstasy and prayer calls to those lucent, lost immensities. And you see the rhythm of this sentence, lucent, lost immensities, what we call in English literature, the alliteration. And then he's telling us, through moments of ecstasy and through voice of prayer, we can connect to those lost immensities. Lost because of my surface consciousness, they are far off. But what is beautiful is this question of ecstasy. And that's exactly what I was explaining to you, or not explaining, telling you a bit, about Savitri itself. That why is it that it really appeals to us so much? Because essentially of these two characteristics, truth and delight. And of course in his, that 5 sons of poetry, in the future poetry, when he describes about the future mantric poetry, he has these as the 5 different elements. That is, one is the truth, the other is beauty, the other is this one, life. So he says a powerful poetry has to deal with all these aspects. And you see Savitri, as I said, essentially it is draped in Ananda. So it's not truth. You see, there's a lot of philosophy. If you take out Savitri, it is plenty of philosophy. And yet you don't feel it as philosophy. Why? Because it's caught in imagery full of dripping with Ananda, dripping with beauty and delight, which really transformed this, which could have been a kind of a dry philosophy, into poetic mantra, into this delight. So when you are in delight, you connect the truth. So delight is one of those experiences where, as if, a chamber of truth opens up. If you are in sadness, in depression, in loneliness, and when you say, I'm low in my spirit, that kind of closes you, stifles you. So, I remember when the mother told somebody about his yoga, she just said, be simple and be happy. Because we thought, what's the meaning of being happy? Is it eating and drinking and doing what we call happiness? Happiness is this delight, this inner delight. And it's this delight which connects us, as he calls it here, to those lost, to those lucent, lost immensities. So that's why to be in the true happiness, to be in delight, is to be open to the higher consciousness. So he would tell us further, even when we fail to look into our souls or lie embedded in earthly consciousness, still have we parts that grow towards the light. Yet are there luminous tracts and heavens serene, and Eldorados of splendor and ecstasy, and temples to the Godhead none can see. There's extremely beautiful poetic lines, and if you can learn these lines and remember them and recite them, that will itself give us a beautiful contact with the inner being. You see, what a solace, what a consolation. He says, even when we fail to look into ourselves, into our souls, most of the time, of course, we fail. We have such an outer consciousness. But he's giving us, even when you fail, do not worry. It's not that everything is lost. Even when you fail into ourselves, or lie embedded in earthly consciousness, that is the perfect description of all of us. Lie embedded in earthly consciousness. But Sri Aurobindo is giving us that hope. Even at that level, you may be completely lost in this earthly consciousness. Even then, still have the parts that grow towards the light. That's an extraordinary hope. When we think, what am I doing? Am I doing sadhana? Am I improving? Am I progressing? I'm just, busy with my day-to-day life. But subconsciously, there are parts that are growing towards the light. Yet are the luminous tracts and heavens serene, and Eldorados of splendor and ecstasy, and temples of the Godhead none can see. We can understand, there's hardly, we don't follow the journey of the inner being. But now we realize that man's life, though apparently lost, embedded in the earthly consciousness, is not a waste. Something is happening. There is a growth. There is a search, there is a seeking. There is a kind of a moving toward that light. So that is how I suppose evolution takes place in all of us. Outwardly I may be busy with things, but inwardly the spirit is seeking its own fulfillment. A shapeless memory lingers in us still, and sometimes when our sight is turned within, earth's ignorant veil is lifted from our eyes. It is a short, miraculous escape. This whole page is an extraordinary, this really gives us a glimpse of our inner being. And what should we do for that glimpse? Marvelous lines when he says here. And sometimes when our sight is turned within, it can be a moment of peace, moment of meditation, moment when you're walking in nature, just with a blank mind. When our sight is turned within, earth's ignorant veil is lifted from our eyes. There's a short, miraculous escape. You see, this earth's ignorant veil is lifted from our eyes. This veil being lifted from our eyes, we get this idea in all mystic poetry. Everywhere we say there's a veil in front of my eyes, that means the veil of ignorance. So when this is parted, when this is lifted, when we have a kind of a moment of silence, and the beautiful thing is, he calls it as, there's a short, miraculous escape. That's why I suppose there's a beauty of living in nature. When we are one identified with the nature, with the sun, with the flowers, with the trees. When we are away from this human sound and fury, there's an escape, this, as he calls it here, a short miraculous escape. You have just a peep. And one little peep, one little joy, a drop of ananda, a drop of ecstasy, and you're connected. And then he says, there's a short miraculous escape, and further describes this narrow fringe of clamped experience we leave behind, meted to us as life. Our little walks, our insufficient reach. So what is the escape here? The escape is into this narrow fringe of clamped experience. This is the clamped experience of life. So when this experience of life is left behind, we leave behind, meted to us as life, all that is given to us, and say, this is life, this is the problem of life, this is the issue of life. When all these things are left behind, then there is our little walks, our insufficient reach. He's describing us, what are the small things, what are the things that really veil us, that is our smallness of life, our insufficient reach, our incapacities. When all these are gone, we escape into that beautiful moment. And this is the most marvelous line here. Our souls can visit in great, lonely hours, still regions of imperishable light, all-seeing eagle peaks of silent power, and moon-flame oceans of swift, fathomless bliss, and calm immensities of spirit's space. I think one should just read this and listen to this verse itself, and that will give us the necessary escape. Our souls can visit in great lonely hours. You see, one is that intense moment. There has to be an intensity. But this intensity of the soul's aspiration can come in lonely hours. That's a marvelous suggestion. I mean, it's not that all the time we should be with people, with society, with children. That's why what we call in our modern language, we need to have space. And that space we are granted perhaps when we are in meditation. But at least people will say, hey, don't disturb me, he is in meditation. But that space for oneself is the lonely hours, where our souls, when our souls can visit still regions of imperishable light. You know, this is there are some people who try to meditate and, as they call it, the silencing of the mind, silencing of thought, quietness. But here what is important is, in these great lonely hours, we visit regions of imperishable light. Which is this region of imperishable light? The inner being, the soul. So these moments of silence, of meditation are important more to visit this inner light. Not necessarily to be proud and say, hey, I've got silence of mind and then I've got peace and then I'm standing there happily. It's a kind of a static thing. In our yoga it says, what do you do with the staticity? It's better to reach this imperishable light and then all-seeing eagle peaks of silent power. For this also you can mount in meditation to greater heights. You see the image that comes, all-seeing eagle peaks of silent power and moon flame oceans of swift fathomless bliss. I think here the image is extraordinary. I mean, one cannot imagine moon and flame and oceans, three words put together, almost hyphenated. I mean, there's hardly any link, moon and flame and ocean. But you see, in a single line, it says, and moon flame oceans of swift, fathomless bliss. So he is now giving us, of course it's so difficult, I suppose, to catch that inner experience. So he has to put together this contrast of words and yet which mean the same. For example, moon symbolizes bliss, of delight. So now he's telling us moon flame, that means the delight, and the flame is the light of the psychic being. That means you can visit your psychic flame, the moon flame, ocean of swift. Again, swift is the dynamic, fathomless bliss. So see, we are getting so many different images, bliss, ocean, flame and moon. But all of them converge onto the same idea that you can visit those inner regions of bliss and beauty of this psychic being. So this is what is done at the time of meditation or at the time of the great lonely hours and calm immensities of spirit space. And this is what is the normal silence of the mind. So for sure, Aurobindo, we see what's happening is when we have this great lonely hours, you go and sit at the Matra Mandir, sit at Sri Aurobindo statue, sit on your terrace and just be yourself. And I think as Sri Aurobindo is telling us that this is needed, this is a requirement, a prerequisite for the souls to visit this bliss luminosity of a psychic being. I mean, the souls can visit means when you can dip within. So it is extremely of extreme importance to see that we are off our daily, the routine pattern and say, hey, let me be myself. And then he puts it beautifully. In the unfolding process of the self, sometimes the inexpressible mystery elects a human vessel of descent. Well, of course here the idea changes a little bit, but we can take that up before we close. In the unfolding process of the self, sometimes the inexpressible mystery elects a human vessel of descent. Now, this is something interesting which we again see a lot in the Gita. When the Lord tells Arjuna many a time that I'm telling you, I'm revealing all this secret because you are the chosen one. So the Divine, the Lord, reveals Himself to those whom He selects, elects, chooses. So every time we see the Lord Krishna telling the Gita, telling Arjuna, this is the secret about your inner self, this is the secret about Purushottama, this is the secret about surrender, He would always add saying, I'm telling you this because you are the chosen one, you are the intimate one, you are the friend that I have selected. So that's the same idea that comes here. The inexpressible mystery elects a human vessel of descent. That means it reveals to mankind through some vessel, some chosen person, about its own secrecies or secrets. So sometimes the inexpressible mystery does that. A breath comes down from a supernal air, a presence is born, a guiding light awakes, a stillness falls upon the instruments, fixed sometimes like a marble monument, stone calm. The body is a pedestal supporting a figure of eternal peace. I think we'll stop here, but I want to just look behind all of you and see somebody sitting exactly like this. The body is a pedestal supporting a figure of eternal peace. Look at Sri Aurobindo, exactly the same. Supporting a figure of eternal peace, the body is a pedestal. So this is where we see, and there's a beautiful line here, fixed sometimes, a stillness falls upon the instrument, the body and everything, fixed sometimes like a marble monument. You see, I remember this word, marble monument, when Udar, most of you have heard about Udar. In his memoirs he writes that once he was given the duty to clean Sri Aurobindo's room. And of course at that time, they are not even supposed to look at Sri Aurobindo. You just look at the ground, your furniture and clean and go, and you cannot be watching Sri Aurobindo, He was not to be disturbed. But in one of his descriptions he says, sometimes I could glimpse at Sri Aurobindo and I saw a marble statue like a Shiva sitting there. So what we see in Sri Aurobindo here is that marble monument, stone calm, a body is a pedestal supporting a figure of eternal peace. So that is almost the description that Udar gives of Sri Aurobindo, that sitting like a Shiva, like a marble statue, immobile, unperturbed, and looking into the gaze of infinity. So a lot of these lines we see describe himself, his own physical experience, a physical body. Well, we will see that later. There are exquisite lines in this next few pages. One of those lines which I'll just read for the sake of reading and then leave you. In moments when the inner lamps are lit and the life's cherished guests are left outside, our spirit sits alone and speaks to its gulfs. Those have been one of my very favorite lines. But it's very difficult. Life's cherished guests are left outside. It's not guests just who come to you from outside, but there are guests within you who really come and disturb. But in moments when the inner lamps are lit and the life-cherished guests are left outside, our spirit sits alone and speaks to its gulfs. This is all said and done. You may not understand because most of you live in Auroville. But this is what I value here in Auroville. When we come to Matra Mandir, to this forest, to this loneliness, this is the spirit sits alone and speaks to its gulfs. Back in Pondicherry, the town doesn't allow you this loneliness, this quietness, this peace. There's all the time. There is Kartika Deepam, there's somebody born, there's the crackers, the noise, the pollution. But this is what I value here in Auroville. The beautiful moments of this loneliness and what Shobinda calls as the great lonely hours. Well, friends, we'll take up in our next class from this line, supporting a figure of eternal peace. Now we will have concentration there.